Hello, hi, my name is Stefan Akulina and I'm the co-director of the Stanislavsky Research Center and director of the School of Performing Arts at University of Malta. It is my pleasure to record this, it's an utmost pleasure, because with me today we have Maria Shevtsova, a scholar who of course we all know. And today she will be speaking to us about her recent book, Rediscovering Stanislavsky. But before we go to the actual presentation, I would like to introduce Maria properly. So Maria Shevtsova is a professor of drama and theatre arts at Goldsmiths University of London, where she is also the director of sociology of theatre and performance research group. Her research profile is of course extensive, and apart from Stanislavsky, on whom she will speak today, it also covers contemporary European theatre, including Russian theatre, and Russia's youngest generation of directors. Her books and articles, it has to be said, have been translated into 14 different languages. Through her position as editor of the influential New Theatre Quarterly, Maria has developed further our field of theatre and performance and its scholarship. Maria is also on the editorial board of the Stanislavsky Studies Journal and on the board of the Stanislavsky Research Center. Finally, Maria also does considerable outreach work, like the writing of program notes, for example, post-performance talks and lectures at theatre festivals, and interviews and conversations with contemporary actors and directors. Maria?
Thank you, Stefan, for that nice, warm introduction and greeting. Hello, everybody. It's a little bit odd, as we were saying earlier with Stefan, you get the sense that you're really talking to yourself. But I do know that I'm talking to you. The book, Rediscovering Stanislavsky, is at my side because there's one quotation I might, if I have time, quote to you just to illuminate a little point I will want to make. But the main purpose really of this talk is to talk to you about kind of the genesis, not so much the genesis, but actually the methods of thinking, what I was thinking about when I started to work on this book and as I was writing it. Now, as Stefan indicated, my range is broad and my great sort of theoretical sociological work informs the Stanislavsky book too. Some of you will notice that, although there is no deliberate kind of sociologizing occurring at all and no sociological jargon. However, the other side of my portfolio really is the work on directors, for which I'm also known. And it was thinking about the contemporaries on whom I'd been working for a number of years, Peter Brook, Ariane Nushkin, Eugenio Barber, thinking about how these very great markers of the 20th century kept talking about ensemble and in fact worked in ensembles. And of course I remembered that Stanislavsky had founded the Moscow Art Theatre, which was really the model of what an ensemble theatre might look like, not only for his time, but for the future. I was also in touch at one point with Katie Mitchell. By in touch with, I mean seeing a lot of her work. And I noted in an interview I did long ago for New Theatre Quarterly with Mitchell, how much Katie had talked about the impact of Russian theatre on her understanding of directing. And also, of course, on her understanding of what it would be to be working with the actors who knew, as in her language, spoke the same language. Because that was a fundamental term that Lev Dodin used when for 7 years I sat on his rehearsals. I was the only person ever whom he ever allowed into those rehearsals. So I felt very privileged that he had given me the opportunity to watch him work so closely and over such a long period of time. And I could see that he is a man, a director, who really did develop a common language with his actors. Things were done, small gestures, no words, not too much talking, never this endless discussion. It was always done, as Dodin said, on his feet. I discovered as I probed more what Stanislavsky did as a director, and you'll see that in my, I think it's my 6th chapter of the book. That he very much worked in terms of an understanding a common language, and partly the system is in fact the basis of that common language, which is also a physical language. We mustn't forget this. There is an assumption that Stanislavsky is somehow all in the head, but no, 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 no. The body is constantly in Stanislavsky's attention and constantly evoked, as I show in my book. So in fact, what was the method, somebody asked me? I said, well, one of the things that certainly informed the way I worked on this book was my great knowledge of contemporary European theatre. And the fact that I was seeing in the contemporary European theatre and beyond it also in other countries, I was seeing echoes of what I discovered more closely when I began rediscovering Stanislavsky, as I hope you will through the pages of the book with me. Because what I began to really see was the sheer range of Stanislavsky's massive achievements, the phenomenal sort of sense of togetherness of all the people involved with him. And I have a long chapter on the 6 studios and another very close sort of discussion about Meyerhold and political theatre and Stanislavsky's interaction with all the people who became part of a much broader picture than just Stanislavsky himself. And also, interestingly enough, a broader picture than Stanislavsky and the Moscow Art Theatre themselves. So that seeing too in all this, I saw a sense of almost anticipation. It's as if, I'm not trying to say that he forecast the development of the theatre, that would be utter nonsense. But what I'm saying is that in his ceaseless research and probing, Stanislavsky came upon aspects, devices, ways of doing and seeing things that have their echoes right through the 20th century and still today into the 21st. Even amongst people who don't, for example, claim any kind of influence from Stanislavsky. Peter Brook is one of them, by the way, or people who don't seem to have a particularly, important or high opinion of Stanislavsky. So this became a source of intrigue for me as well. What really was it in the contemporary theatre world that sent me back looking at Stanislavsky again? Because all those paths seem to be going like Peter, Simon McBurney's magnificent production, which I hope you saw, Encounters, where at the end, everybody is going back to the source, and this fantastic sense of movement and of spiritual awakening and discovery that one gets in McBurney's production, the source, the source. Now, of course, in the time that I started listening to Katie Mitchell talking about Stanislavsky, I had already written my book on Lev Dodin, which was not so much a statement about Dodin and what he owes to Stanislavsky as a very close study of Dodin, which, as I discovered when I was writing this book, gave me enormous insight into Stanislavsky that I probably would not, I don't think, have had without that very deeply rooted experience of working with Dodin so closely for 7 years. Now, the next thing that really got me going on this book was the problematical notion of the life of the human spirit, which most people, as I discovered, no matter what country they're working in, tend to brush over as not really terribly significant. I remember a French colleague saying very dismissively some years back that, of course, Stanislavsky came out with all this stuff that was incomprehensible about the human spirit. And well, I'd been working on Grotowski, and I wasn't going to be sneezing and dismissing the human spirit, far from. Anyway, it's not part of my own worldview to dismiss this. I consider this to be a crucially important aspect of Stanislavsky's work. And as I say in my 3rd chapter on the actor, I think it is a crucial aspect of Stanislavsky's worldview, a really very important, comprehensive worldview, a site, if you like, from which everything creative developed from him. And so several things happened. I'd been asked in 2000 and whatever year it was, I think it came out in 2010. So it's a long time ago, that's 10 years ago. I was asked by TDR to review the then new translation of Benedetti of Stanislavskys "Aktor работает над собой," an actor works on himself. Работа актера над собой, an actor's work on himself. And of course, My Life in Art, which everybody knows, or hopefully everybody knows. And this life of the human spirit kept coming up as a problem. It was very clear. I took, I only had to write a 400-word account of these two translations. I found myself spending 3 months of research. I compared Hapgood's translation, I compared Benedetti's with Hapgood's, and I compared both to 2 editions, the Soviet edition and then the immediate 90s one edition of Stanislavsky's collected works. So I had 4 versions basically of Stanislavsky, and occasionally I took in another Soviet edition of Stanislavsky just to cross-check a few things. And I discovered, a little bit to my consternation, that there was a great deal of misinterpretation, mistranslation, misapprehension about this whole notion of the spirit. I didn't spend too much on it, of course, in a 400-word review, but it left me thinking that there was indeed a problem here that I really had to come to terms with and perhaps somehow try and solve it, if only for myself. So this is where I worked. I went back to my work on Brooke. I went back to my work on Grotowski in the past. I went into the work of Vassiliev, whose work I knew already from the 90s and the late 80s, and whom I know, of course, personally, which helps me in many ways to have some very interesting conversations with Vassiliev. And then a wild card entered the picture. I discovered, and you'll see this reference in the epilogue, because all my contemporary directors come back fully in focus in the last chapter. They do appear earlier, but they come fully into focus in the last chapter. And the wild card in this kind of spiritual quartet was, to my great surprise, Peter Sellers. And he appears also, as I said, in that last, well, I call it not a chapter, an epilogue, and you'll understand when you read this book why I do that. So looking closely at this quintet, I saw a quotation from Brooke that I had not paid all that much attention to only several years before, because I was doing something about Brooke, or talking, yes, I was talking about Peter Brook in Russia. That's right. I did a Russian lecture on Brooke at the Electro Theatre. It went onto the YouTube. You can find it, but it's, as I say, I had to get a Russian to find it for me because I had no idea how you navigated the Russian YouTube. But it was when I was preparing that lecture that I looked closely again at a sentence that Brooke had written. And he says there something, I'll just paraphrase it very quickly, about exploring the possibilities of the human being is already a spiritual search. Well, you can imagine how that got me going on the life of the human spirit, and of course on all those mistranslations, about which I talk, by the way, in my 3rd chapter. I mean, I could have written an entire book by that stage on the mistranslations of Stanislavsky, because I've done all the groundwork for the 2010 book review. Like, you've got to be mad to spend 3 months for a book review of 400 words, but research is like that. And that's one of the methods of research that, for the young people listening here, I would really recommend. You start off at a tangent and you go around byways like Peer Gynt, and eventually you get to the central point, and then bingo, you see it. And then bingo, you see it. So, bingo, I saw the full weight also of Peter Brook's statement. And later I was talking with Luc Perceval, who's a very great Belgian director. He also appears, by the way, in this book. And I remember Luc saying something about, well, what I really ask every time I do a production is, what is it to be human? It's the being human that is so terribly important. And I think probably in the time of COVID, we are beginning to look at this whole problem of what it is to be human all over again, you know, forced in some ways by the necessities of being less than human, or some people would disagree with me, but I think it might be just a little bit less than human to be talking to you in a void, not seeing you. Whereas if we were face to face, I would be able to see you responding to me invisibly in that communion that Stanislavsky talks about so much, and which has also been mistranslated into English, not only by Benedetti, but has been mistranslated into English as communication. This is communication, but to be together is communion, and there is a huge difference. And that's the whole difference of being, you know, a team and an ensemble company. But that's by the by, that's something I discuss in the book. So you can see the paths that led towards this book from the present. I was looking backwards to Stanislavsky, not starting from Stanislavsky in history, but looking backwards and seeing, and the view is very different when you look backwards. And I think that might be the kind of defining characteristic of this book, is that the view becomes a different view when you look backwards. Then, of course, I'm not sure, I probably have used up my time, but I'll clean up very quickly by saying, you know, even such directors as Thomas Ostermeier, many of you might have seen some of his work in London. He brought those magnificent Shakespeares, the Hamlet and the Richard III, which I first saw at the Schaubühne. But you see, even these extraordinarily surrealistic, way over the top, hugely theatricalized productions of Ostermeier always ask the same question: what it is to be human. And looking more closely at the work of Ostermeier, I've already written about Ostermeier in my Introduction to Theatre Directing book, also for Cambridge, 2013 or 14, whenever it came out, I cannot remember. But I was looking again at the Ostermeier I knew from the vantage point now of a contemporary Ostermeier seen through the eyes of Stanislavsky, and of Stanislavsky seen through the eyes of contemporary directors, to understand how closely, in fact, Ostermeier's way of working is with Stanislavsky's. So a lot of it from the early so-called Stanislavsky, the magic if and so on, emotional memory, that aspect, but also his great love and desire to really do less and less production work and actually do more and more laboratory experimental work in Stanislavsky's spirit, because we mustn't forget that he was really, it's not attributed to Stanislavsky, they all say it's Meyerhold, but I say that's wrong. It's Stanislavsky who asked Meyerhold to run the first studio laboratory, and the book explains too how much he invested in that and how much money he lost in that, by the way, as well, which is really quite significant. It's in a footnote, alas. It's something that should have been more focused in the chapter, but you know, you've got publishers screaming at you and breathing down your neck and saying, well, you can only have so many words, you can't have any more. And I'm thinking, oh Christ, I could have written 2 volumes of this blasted book, but you know, you don't get the great privilege of having 2 books. I only had 1. So I say the maximum and the minimum, and hope that my readers will follow up research, that the research will develop from here, from where I could not speak what I know, but I hope there'll be opportunities where I will be able to speak that which I have not written. So Ostermeier, in the sort of non-so-called realistic tradition, Stanislavsky, as we know, hated isms of any kind. And Ostermeier, like the great Yuri Butusov, who is probably 5, 6, maybe even 10 years older than Butusov, so not of what I call the young generation. By the young generation, I mean I work on the directors who are in their 30s today in Russia, and they are fantastically interesting. But Butusov is a kind of mid-generation, perhaps, director, and you know, watching Butusov's 5.5-hour Macbeth, in which there is masses of, you know, I don't know what you call it, rock is not the right word, but you know, Nirvana and the Beatles and the Who, and I don't remember who, the Door, and I don't know, all sorts of American groups that I really don't know, except that I heard them, you know, somewhere along the track. With all this music doing the work for him, and the kind of etude style approach that he takes to productions, lo and behold, there are 2 whole sentences from Shakespeare in a production called Macbeth Cinema of 5.5 hours long. And I kept seeing this process of delivering magnificently alive, dynamic, very modern productions by a man whose pedigree is definitely Stanislavsky, and his teacher was well, it's in the book, see, I'll leave you for the pedigree. But what was very, very striking was the quality of etude of the actual composition of his productions and the realization that there was a very strong link to Stanislavsky in this quality of the work, so that no isms. Here is this great modern, vibrant, unbelievably youthful production, and the audience packed with kids, you know, look, 18 to maybe 25, which says something terribly important about the modernity and the youthfulness of this work. But, you know, in all that, talking to Butusov over several years, it became also very, very clear that the etude, this etude method, if you like, of directing is also deeply rooted in the notion of the subconscious, which is fundamental, as you know, or you'll see more of that in my book. So that this whole combination of etude and the subconscious as the process of performing is terribly, terribly more important. And it is certainly also important among the younger, these 30s directors, but they've got other characteristics, which I'm afraid we'll have to leave for another time when we have another chance to meet in the ethereal space of the cosmos. Bye-bye, have a wonderful time.
Thank you, Maria.